Losing a job hurts. Finding out your son no longer claims you hurts differently. If you had driven past the facility that morning, you wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. The gates were open, the lights were on. The refrigeration units hummed the way they always had. It looked like another normal day. But for me, it was the last morning I was allowed to pretend I still belonged. I was already on the floor before sunrise, walking the long concrete aisle between cold storage units, clipboard in hand, breath turning white in the air. 78 years old, and I still checked the temperature gauges myself. Not because anyone asked me to, but because that's what I'd always done. People like to say men my age should be home, sipping coffee, watching the news, complaining about their knees. But I built this place, every inch of it. And you don't abandon something you built with your own hands just because your hair turns gray. I paused at Unit C14 and knocked twice on the steel door out of habit. Solid, cold seal intact. -2 degrees, right where it needed to be. Good. Another load safe. Another day running the way it should. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Not rushed, not hesitant, confident. The kind of steps that belong to someone who thinks the ground will always move out of his way. I didn't turn around right away. I already knew who it was. Dad. I turned. My son stood there, clean jacket, pressed shirt, phone already in his hand like a shield. He looked younger than I remembered. Or maybe I just looked older reflected in his eyes. He didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on the cold, didn't say good morning. Instead, he held out a large white envelope. I need you to read this. That was the moment something inside me tightened. Not fear, not anger, just instinct. The same instinct you get right before a storm hits, when the air goes still and quiet in a way that doesn't feel right. I took the envelope. It was heavier than paper should be. Inside was a single sheet, no letterhead, no legal jargon, just one sentence typed clean and sharp. Dad, I'm not your son. I read it twice, then a third time. The cold around me didn't matter anymore. The machines faded into the background. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing. He watched my face carefully, like a man watching a stock chart, waiting to see which direction it would move. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. I didn't demand an explanation. Because what do you say when your own child doesn't just fire you, but erases you? I raised you, I said finally. My voice surprised me. It was steady, too steady. He nodded once, like he'd expected that line. And I'm grateful. But raising me doesn't give you control anymore. Control. That word stung more than the sentence on the paper. I thought of the nights sleeping in my truck so payroll would clear, the mortgage I signed alone, the birthdays I missed, the hospitals I sat in while he slept, unaware of how close we were to losing everything. All of it reduced to control. Around us, the facility kept running. Forklifts beeped in the distance, a door slammed. Life moved forward, indifferent. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Okay, I said. His eyebrows twitched, just for a second. He had expected resistance, maybe tears, maybe bargaining. Instead, he got silence. And silence, I've learned, is the most dangerous thing a man like my son can face. Because this wasn't just another revenge story. It was the beginning of a reckoning he didn't even realize he'd triggered. I handed the envelope back to him and turned toward the exit, my boots echoing softly against the floor. Behind me, he called out, "You should go home, Dad. Get some rest." I didn't answer, because rest is something you earn, and I wasn't done yet. I wish I could tell you the envelope was the hardest part, that the words on that paper were the moment everything broke. But the truth is, the paper didn't hurt as much as what came after. We stood there in the cold aisle for a few seconds longer than necessary. He didn't rush me. He wanted to see if I'd fall apart. He wanted confirmation that the sentence he'd typed had landed exactly where he aimed it. "I've already informed the board," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "This isn't emotional. It's procedural." Procedural. That was his favorite word lately. Every time he said it, it meant someone else was about to lose something. He gestured toward the far end of the facility, where a few supervisors were pretending not to watch us. Men I had hired. Men whose kids' names I knew. Men who used to call me when the compressors went down at 3 in the morning because they trusted my judgment more than any manual. "They'll handle operations going forward," my son continued. "You don't need to be involved anymore." I followed his gaze. No one met my eyes. Not because they didn't respect me, but because they didn't know what to do with a man being erased in real time. I nodded slowly. "You're taking my name off the door?" I said. He didn't deny it. "The brand needs a clean break." A clean break. I thought of the night 37 years earlier, when the first unit went live and the power surged so hard it blew half the breakers. I slept on the floor that night, my jacket folded under my head, because I didn't trust the system to stay stable without someone there. Apparently, none of that counted as brand value anymore. He cleared his throat. "Security will deactivate your access card by noon. HR will coordinate severance." Severance. That one almost made me laugh. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated just a fraction of a second, long enough for me to notice. $2,500 a month, he said. Tax-free. It's generous, given the circumstances. Given the circumstances. I had signed personal guarantees worth millions so this place could exist. I had buried my wife while the company was bleeding cash and still showed up the next morning so payroll wouldn't bounce. And now I was being handed an allowance. If you're listening to this, and you've ever watched your life's work get summarized into a monthly number, then you already know how that moment feels. It isn't anger. It's something quieter, heavier. "I'll think about it," I said. That surprised him. Most men argue when they're cornered. They negotiate. They remind you of sacrifices. I didn't do any of that. I handed him the clipboard I'd been carrying all morning. The same clipboard I'd used for years. "Unit C-14 is running warm," I said. "Have maintenance check the seal before the afternoon load." He stared at me, confused. For a second, I thought he might say thank you, or ask a question. Instead, he took the clipboard without looking at it. "You don't need to worry about that anymore, Dad." There it was. Not just dismissal, instruction. I turned toward the exit, my boots echoing softly against the floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because my legs were weak, but because every sound reminded me how long I'd walked these halls, believing I was building something for him. At the door, I stopped. "You know," I said, not turning around, "when you were 5, you used to hide behind my leg every time the machines got too loud." He didn't respond. "I stayed because you were scared," I continued. "I stayed when it would have been easier to walk away." Silence. I nodded once, mostly to myself, and stepped outside into the morning air. Behind me, the facility doors slid shut with a soft mechanical hiss. It sounded final. And for the first time since I picked up that envelope, I understood something clearly. Being fired was never the point. Being told my years meant nothing, that was the real cut. And that wound? That one doesn't close quietly. The meeting was already underway when I walked back inside. That alone told me everything I needed to know. The long conference table was full. Department heads, legal counsel, a few outside consultants I didn't recognize. Coffee cups, laptops open, screens glowing. It looked efficient, organized, modern, and not a single empty chair. No one had thought to save me a seat. My son stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, confident in the way only men who've never built anything from scratch can be. He didn't acknowledge me at first. He kept talking, clicking through slides, using words like realignment, forward momentum, strategic clarity. Then someone noticed me. The room shifted. Conversations slowed. Eyes darted away. My son paused, finally turned, and gave me a thin, professional smile. Not a son's smile, a CEO's. "Since everyone's here," he said, voice calm and steady, "we'll make this official." He nodded to the attorney beside him. Papers were passed around. No ceremony, no hesitation. "As of today," my son continued, "we're transitioning leadership fully to the new structure. This company needs to evolve, and that requires making difficult decisions." Difficult. That word landed like a dull blade. He didn't say my name. He didn't say father. He spoke as if I were a problem being solved, not a person standing 10 feet away who had given his life to this place. "This isn't personal," he added, glancing at me briefly. "It's just business." Just business. I looked around the room. Faces I knew well. Men and women whose mortgages I'd signed off on during lean years. People who had sat at my kitchen table when things were uncertain. Not one of them spoke. My son cleared his throat. "We're also rebranding. A clean break from outdated perceptions." Outdated. The word hung there, heavy and deliberate. "For clarity," he said, "we're moving away from founder-driven identity. Legacy management creates confusion in the market." There it was. He didn't just remove me from the company. He removed the idea of me. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Another pretended to take notes. I realized then that this wasn't about efficiency. It wasn't about modernization. It was about erasing the shadow. Every contract signed, every crisis survived, every late night. I had been the constant. And to him, that constancy had become a threat. "I want everyone to understand," my son said, raising his voice slightly, "that gratitude doesn't equal authority. Respect doesn't equal control." He looked straight at me when he said it. The implication was clear. Whatever I'd done before didn't matter now. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not heartbreak. Something colder. Something final. I could have spoken. I could have reminded the room who kept the lights on when the banks wouldn't answer calls. I could have listed names, dates, numbers, but that would have been begging for relevance. Instead, I nodded once. Not to him, to myself. Because in that moment, I understood the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. He wasn't pushing me out because I'd failed. He was pushing me out because my success reminded him of his dependence. As the meeting moved on, budget forecasts, timelines, projections, I quietly turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Behind me, my son's voice continued, smooth and confident, laying claim to a future built on a past he no longer wanted to acknowledge. The door closed softly, and with it, something else closed too. Not my anger, not my resolve, but my willingness to be invisible while someone else took credit for my blood and sweat. That day, my years weren't just dismissed. They were publicly declared irrelevant. And that kind of insult doesn't fade. It waits. I didn't go home right away. I drove. No destination, just the road and the steady hum of tires against asphalt. That sound has a way of settling a man's thoughts. It reminds you that movement doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just forward. My phone stayed dark on the passenger seat. No calls, no apologies, no confusion. That silence told me more than words ever could. I pulled into a quiet parking lot near the old distribution hub, the one we shut down years ago. Cracked pavement, faded lines, a place everyone forgot about once the shiny buildings went up. I sat there for a long time. That's when my phone finally buzzed. A text from my son. We should talk. That was it. No dad, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what he'd done in that room full of people. Just control. Still, I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. There are moments in a man's life when he's tested, not by force, but by restraint. When saying less is harder than saying everything. I typed one word. Okay. I didn't add a question mark. I didn't soften it. I didn't explain. I set the phone down. That single word did something I don't think he expected. It took the fight away from him. An hour later, he asked me to meet him. Neutral ground. A cafe near the office. Glass walls. Public. Safe. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting stiffly, dressed like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom. He didn't stand, didn't smile. He slid something across the table before I even sat down. An envelope. Plain, white, heavy. I picked it up slowly. The weight of paper has its own gravity. Across the front, in his handwriting, were the words, Dad, I'm not your son. Not metaphorical, not symbolic. Legal. Inside were documents, statements, filings, signatures, a formal declaration. He'd severed the last tie that mattered, at least on paper. Disowned. Clean. Efficient. He watched my face closely, waiting for a reaction. Anger, shock, begging. I gave him none of it. You think this makes you free, I said quietly. He stiffened. It does. It removes conflict. Investors don't like emotional entanglements. There it was again, reducing blood to inconvenience. I built this company without needing permission, he continued. I won't be managed by guilt. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said again. That word landed harder this time. He frowned. That's it? I looked at him. Really looked. The tailored suit, the practiced confidence. The man trying desperately to prove he didn't need the very foundation he was standing on. You wanted distance, I said. You got it. I stood up. I left the envelope on the table, untouched. As I walked out, I felt something settle inside me. Not pain. Clarity. Because silence isn't surrender. It's space. And space is where leverage lives. By the time he realized what okay actually meant, it would already be too late to take it back. That envelope wasn't the end. It was the last warning he didn't know he was giving himself. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. Paper can say whatever a man wants it to say. Reality doesn't care. That night, I laid it on my desk, face down, like you do with a loaded tool you're not ready to use yet. Then I made coffee the old way, slow, strong, no machine smarter than I was. I slept fine. The next morning, I didn't call anyone. That was the part that would have unsettled him the most if he'd known. He expected panic, or rage, or negotiation, something loud enough to respond to. Instead, I went back to routines he never paid attention to. I checked the weather reports, fuel prices, long-term maintenance schedules, the bones of the business. Then I drove to the records office downtown, the one nobody visits anymore because everything's digital. I signed in with a pen that barely worked and waited my turn like everyone else. I asked for copies, not company records, not employee files, land deeds, warehouse leases, titles, the things that don't show up on a CEO dashboard. The clerk looked surprised when she pulled the folder. "These go back a while," she said. "They do," I replied. "That's why they still matter." By noon, I had everything I needed. That afternoon, my son called, twice. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, but because I was busy confirming something I already suspected. Ownership is quiet. Control doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, waiting for the right moment to stand up. I met with a lawyer I'd known longer than my son had been alive. No assistants, no conference room. Just a worn desk and 2 chairs that had heard worse stories than mine. I laid the papers out, one by one. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back, rubbed his jaw, and said, "He doesn't know, does he?" "No," I said. "He thinks titles mean authority." The lawyer gave a dry smile. "That's common." We talked about contingencies, about timing, about how companies often forget who actually holds the keys when they grow too fast and start believing their own press releases. Nothing dramatic, no threats, just facts. I left with a short list written on a yellow pad. Things to verify, things to secure, things not to rush. On the way home, I stopped at the same cafe where he'd handed me the envelope. Sat at the same table, ordered the same coffee. The waitress asked if I wanted sugar. "No," I said. "I like it honest." I watched people come and go. Young professionals glued to their phones. Older men reading newspapers no one prints anymore. I wondered when my son stopped noticing men like that. When he decided age meant weakness instead of patience. That evening, a message came through. "We need to finalize things soon. Soon." That's what people say when they think time is on their side. I typed back one word. Understood. And meant something very different than he did. Because when a man has been erased publicly, dismissed privately, and written off legally, he either breaks or he prepares. And preparation doesn't look like revenge. It looks like letting the other person keep moving forward, unaware that the ground beneath him is already being measured. Quietly, accurately, and without mercy. The first sign wasn't loud. It never is. It came as a delay. A shipment that didn't clear on time. A payment that took longer than usual to post. A supplier asking for clarification instead of confirmation. Small things, easy to explain away if you don't know where to look. I knew where to look. By midweek, the calls started. Not to me, to him. I heard about it later, from people who still knew how to whisper. The bank wanted updated paperwork. The landlord wanted verification. Insurance wanted signatures from someone whose name didn't sit right anymore. My son handled it the way he handled everything, by pushing forward, assuming momentum would solve the problem. It didn't. Momentum only works when the ground underneath agrees with you. That afternoon, he called me again. This time, he left a voicemail. His voice was tight, controlled, careful. "Dad, there are questions coming up. Nothing serious. I just need you to confirm a few things. It'll be quick." Quick. I listened once, then deleted it. Not out of spite, out of discipline. That night, I pulled the envelope out from under the stack of papers where I'd left it. I opened it, not to read, but to feel the paper between my fingers. Thin, official, confident in its own authority. He'd thought this document closed a chapter. What it actually did was isolate him. Because the moment he cut himself off from me, he also cut himself off from what I quietly represented. Continuity, history, trust that doesn't need to be reintroduced every quarter. The next morning, I got a call from someone else. A contractor I'd worked with for 20 years. Good man, slow talker, paid on time, every time. "They're asking me to renegotiate terms," he said. "Said the company's going in a new direction." I smiled to myself. New direction usually means unfamiliar territory. "Do what you need to do," I told him. "Just make sure you're protected." He paused. "You're not worried?" "No," I said. "I'm patient." That afternoon, the second crack appeared. A notice, formal, polite, carefully worded. A clause being revisited. A requirement being enforced. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just the rules being read, the way they were always meant to be read. By evening, my son called again. This time, there was frustration in his voice. Not panic yet, but confusion. "Dad," he said, dropping the tone he used with attorneys. "What's going on?" I waited a beat. Then I answered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "You're the one in charge." Silence. He was starting to understand that authority doesn't live in announcements. It lives in alignment, and alignment was slipping through his fingers. I hung up before he could ask more. The first crack doesn't bring a building down. It just tells you where the stress is. And once you see that, you don't rush. You let the weight do what weight always does. If you're still with me right now, I want to ask you something, quietly. Have you ever watched someone dismiss years of loyalty as if it were optional, and then slowly realize they needed it more than they thought? If that moment feels familiar, you already understand what's coming next.